Far from the hustle and bustle of big cities, out past the safety of your front porch, something watches us with hollow eyes. Strange intruders, hovering in quiet rice fields across rural Thailand, disappearing in a flash when noticed. A dark presence with no name, observing a young girl as she walks through the countryside, and hitchhikers that no sane driver would stop for, thumbing rides from truckers on lonely highways. This episode will take you through 3 astonishing cases that defy logic and prove that unknown intelligences aren't just real, they're watching us from the fields. I'm Josh Dinocchio. This is What Lurks Beneath. You won't want to miss this one. On the morning of August 31st, 2005, a 51-year-old farmer named Sawang Boonruchasak woke up earlier than usual in his small home in Wai Nam Rak, Thailand. This remote village, which is located in Chai Rang province, is about 488 miles north of Bangkok. The region is famous for its breathtaking beauty. I mean, there's lush forest, rolling hills, rice fields that just seem to stretch on into the horizon forever. It truly is breathtaking. Most days, Sawang was grateful for the isolation, but today, he would experience something that even now he still can't explain. From the moment he opened his eyes, something felt off. He could just feel it inside of him, and he couldn't quite put his finger on it. There was just this vague sense of just something in the air that wasn't right. As he stepped outside his home at around 7:45 to begin his daily work, he noticed that the unusual commotion had disturbed the usual peacefulness of his surroundings. Several of his neighbors were gathered at the edge of a rice field owned by an elderly villager named T. Kitkangbon, who was 69 years old. They were pointing at something in the field and talking excitedly among themselves. Confused and curious, Sawang made his way over to the growing crowd, wondering what's going on, and as he did, this woman from his village turned to him with these wide eyes, and she was out of breath, very excited, and she's telling him that she had first seen it over an hour earlier, and in the dim dawn of light, she had thought that she was imagining things, but whatever it was still out there. Look! Sawang, following her finger to where she was pointing out to the rice field, and what he saw made him freeze, because at first he thought it was just standing out there, but he instantly realized that it was actually hovering about 2.5 feet above the ground. Folks, this wasn't a silver flying disc, it wasn't a UFO, it wasn't a black pyramid. It was truly bizarre, and this isn't even the strangest part. What he saw, well, it was unlike anything he'd ever seen. It was small, only a little over 2 feet tall and bright yellow in color, and it had a disproportionately large head with enormous ears protruding from either side, and its eyes were these deep, blood red orbs that just seemed to glow unnaturally. And he realized that he's looking at a being, but it didn't have arms, and it was just this small torso that kind of tapered down to pointed feet that didn't quite touch the ground. And from what he could tell, it had a very tiny little mouth, and it appeared to be fixed in this kind of permanent grimace. And he ended up standing there for a full half hour, just transfixed on this thing until around 8:30 in the morning. This being slowly turned its oversized head and appeared to nod at the gathering crowd as if acknowledging their presence. And the movement was so deliberate and distinctly unnatural that it clearly chilled Sawang. These people weren't just watching, they were being watched. And Sawang found himself asking, along with everybody else there, what is this thing? One of the other men there in the crowd, a man in his 30s, said that no one had been able to figure it out. It had just been hovering out above the rice field for about 2 hours now, and he said that he had watched it long enough to see it nod its head a few times, but it hadn't made a peep all morning. Now, at this point, more and more villagers were arriving at the scene, drawn by the news of the strange visitor, which by this point had spread like wildfire. I mean, everybody knew about it. And as the morning continuously progressed, more than 10 members found themselves gathered at the edge of the rice field, all waiting to catch a glimpse of what they would eventually call the Chiang Rai scarecrow. Some of the villagers were terrified, but others were fascinated, but all were united in astonishment at what they were seeing. Nothing much more occurred for hours, and no one really found the courage to venture out into the field. And so finally, about 10:30 that morning, something happened. As everybody watched, the yellow entity suddenly began to morph and change, and it didn't make any sense. Everyone agreed because the only way to describe was that the being appeared to stretch, and then its form was elongating upward, and as it grew taller, its bright yellow color gradually darkened until it was completely black. A murmur of excitement within the crowd, and then in one final bizarre display, the now black thing took off, shooting upward and vanishing for good. Now, some of the witnesses later would claim that it disappeared into what looked like a bright orb of light, while others say that it just was gone entirely. Either way, the village was completely stunned for several moments afterwards. What's really interesting is that several people had reported seeing what they described as a floating fire near the same field in the late hours of August 30th. In the excitement of the morning events, no one had made the connection until now, but everyone agreed that it must have something to do with this tiny, scarecrow-like being that had appeared mere hours later. Within a matter of days, news of this strange sighting in Way Nam Rock had spread far beyond the boundaries of the village. You had an investigator by the name Kittikisem Ratanakosa who arrived to interview the witnesses and examine the area where the intruder had been seen floating in the field. His investigation didn't yield any physical evidence or any logic to explain what the villagers had reported. The story quickly caught the attention of Thai television networks, which reported on the incident using the term John Bin, which translates to flying saucer in English. A UFO investigator by the name of Terry Colvin posted about the incident online on September 10th, bringing international attention to the strange occurrence, and before they knew it, with intense media coverage, at least of this event, there was a sudden influx of visitors. You had around 100 curious outsiders began arriving each day, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever this thing was, or simply to stand in the place where it had appeared. The tiny town, which had never been designed to handle traffic like this, began to experience significant problems. The roads leading to the rice field rapidly deteriorated under the constant stream of vehicles and required repairs. After a while, the situation became so chaotic that law enforcement was forced to dispatch officers to the area just to manage the crowds to maintain order. Meanwhile, the mayor, who was recognizing both the challenges and opportunities presented by this, requested that cameras be installed in the field where the sighting had taken place, and he had hoped to capture evidence of any future appearances. Well, about 10 days after the initial sighting, a man from a nearby village came forward with what he believed might be an explanation. In an interview with a community radio station on September 11th, 2005, Tong Muan Pocheloe claimed that he was responsible. You see, earlier in August, he had found a helium-filled rubber doll that he had then used as a scarecrow in his fields. The doll, according to his description, was greenish-orange in color and had both arms and legs but no ears. He went on to explain that on August 29th, just 2 days before the sighting, a powerful storm had swept through and carried away his makeshift scarecrow. He suggested that what the villagers had seen might have been his lost doll, though he couldn't explain how it would have changed color or stretched or nodded, or seemingly moved on its own. Or, of course, taken off into the sky in a burst of light. As you might imagine, none of these discrepancies were lost on the original witnesses, because when they were shown a photograph of the type of doll that he had used and described, they all unanimously denied that that was what they had seen. The doll in the photo had arms and legs and lacked the distinctive large ears that had been such a prominent feature of what they had saw. And in the weeks and months that came afterwards, all the excitement eventually died down. As for what exactly appeared in the rice field that August morning, whether it was an extraterrestrial being, an interdimensional traveler, a manifestation of something else entirely, or simply a misidentified conventional phenomenon, the mystery of the Chiang Rai scarecrow remains unsolved. And they aren't alone, because nearly 80 years earlier and over 5,000 miles away, a witness in the United Kingdom saw something similar. On December 1st, 1968, a woman named Pauline Berger sat down at her kitchen table in Leicester, England, and began writing about something strange that had happened to her when she was a child. This wasn't something she talked about much anymore because whenever she did, people would kind of laugh it off and tell her that she must have imagined it. But Pauline knew that what she saw was real, and now, after all these years, she finally felt like she had the proof. You see, the incident that Pauline was writing about had happened about 40 years earlier, around 1928, when she was just 6 years old. Back then, one of her favorite things to do was to go on walks with her dad in the fields along Ainsty Lane in Leicester. For little Pauline, these walks weren't just walks, they were adventures, and she loved exploring the countryside with her father, listening to him tell stories and just enjoying being in the outdoors together. And on this day, she and her dad had set out for one of their regular walks. The weather was perfect, with just a light breeze, and she had brought along a book she was reading, thinking she might be able to find a nice spot to sit and read for a bit if they took a break during their walk. Well, as they walked through the fields, Pauline noticed that her dad was starting to seem pretty tired. He'd been working very hard that week, and the nice weather was making him a bit drowsy. About halfway through their usual route, he suggested that they take a break, so he found a comfortable spot in the grass across from one of the fields and lay down, telling Pauline he was just going to close his eyes for a few minutes, and, Pauline was fine with this. So of course, she planned for it. She sat down nearby, opened her book, perfectly content to read while her dad took a nap. Well, it didn't take long before her dad was snoring, and she could hear his steady breathing as she sat there reading. And every once in a while, she'd look up to watch butterflies or just enjoy the scenery. I mean, it was peaceful and quiet, and there was just the sound of birds and, rustling of pages as she read. And after reading for a while, she looked up again to give her eyes a rest. And that's when she noticed something strange in the field ahead of her. Maybe about 100 yards in the distance, she spotted a strange figure standing in the field. It was completely motionless. She stared at it, trying to understand what this was that the figure had a large, bulbous head and a pair of long arms hanging down at its sides. Now, given where she was, her first thought was that it must be a scarecrow. I mean, that would make sense. Farmers put scarecrows in their fields all the time to keep the birds away, but as she continued to examine it, there's just something that felt so off about it. It didn't really look like any scarecrow that she'd ever seen, and its outline was too smooth and solid. The way that it stood was not right either. And so, she's sitting there reading through her book, and she keeps looking up at it thinking like, I don't know, I don't feel good about it. And then she started to notice more things that really, really bothered her. Next to this figure was what appeared to be some kind of small structure or hut, and she was confused because she was sure that she would have noticed something like that when she first sat down, but she was absolutely certain that this structure had not been there earlier. Now, when they had first walked into the field, she had a clear view of that entire area, and there definitely hadn't been any building or structures there. It had somehow appeared while she was reading her book. And this wasn't a normal looking building either. It wasn't like a rectangular farm building or shed that she was used to seeing. It was round and shaped almost like a globe or a large ball, and seemed to be sitting on legs, like a strange pod. She turned to her dad, who was still asleep on the grass, and she reached out, shook his arm, and she's whispering to him, "Wake up." But her dad didn't respond. He just, kind of cracked his eyes and mumbled something and kept on sleeping. And so she starts to shake him harder, and she didn't whisper quietly this time. She's starting to raise her voice and yell, and finally his eyes open, and he looks confused for a moment, and then, he sits up, he's rubbing his face and eyes, and of course, he's asking her what's the matter. And instantly, she's like, look over there, what is that thing? Explaining to him that there's some strange figure or person over there, and then she's asking him if he remembered seeing the building over there because it wasn't there prior. Pauline's dad looked in the direction that she was pointing, squinting, and after a moment, he looked confused because he didn't see anything. It was just the field. And so Pauline looked back. To her complete shock, both the figure and the globe-shaped hut had completely vanished, just like it had been when they arrived. It was as if they had never been there at all. Now, more confused and scared, the girl, who was now even more confused and scared, insisted that she had just seen what she had described. There had been a black figure with a big head and long arms, and next to it was a round hut that wasn't there before. but Pauline's dad just smiled and patted her on the shoulder. She must have been dreaming, he said, or it was her imagination, because there was nothing to be seen. Well, no matter how much she insisted that she had to be wide awake and had definitely seen something, her dad was simply skeptical. She couldn't believe what it was that she had saw. And unfortunately for her, it almost became a sort of family joke, something that would come up at family gatherings. And they would mock her and just laugh at her. Well, decades passed and she grew up, got married, and had kids of her own. And the strange incident from her childhood remained this very vivid, burning memory that she rarely, if ever, talked about. But one day in 1968, her own son showed her a magazine because he was interested in all sorts of things, including unexplained mysteries. And the magazine was the latest issue of Flying Saucer Review, and he encouraged her to read it. He's like, "Mom, check this out. This is really interesting." And so she's reading it, not really expecting much. But later that evening, as she flipped through the pages, she saw something. There, in an article about a separate UFO sighting, were images that looked exactly like what she had seen all those years ago in the field. One image showed black figures about 5 feet tall with large heads and long, strange arms, and the description mentioned witnesses seeing these entities near what they believed to be a spacecraft, and there was an illustration of what some described as a landing craft, which is a spherical object that sat on leg-like supports. The magazine simply called it a globe on legs, which was exactly what she had been trying to describe since she was 6. It was an incredible moment of validation, and all these years she had begun to doubt her own memory, wondering if just perhaps her dad had been right after all. But now, with the evidence that her experience wasn't unique or imagined, she truly believed. Whatever she had seen that summer day in the field, whether it was visitors from another world or something else, it had been real. So that evening, December 1st, 1968, Pauline sat down, wrote out her story, described in detail what she had seen as a 6-year-old girl in that field along Anstey Lane. She included how the images in the Flying Saucer Review had finally confirmed what she had been telling her family for decades. For the first time, she felt like maybe people would finally believe her story. Whatever she saw that day left such an impression on her that even years later, 40 years later, she could remember every detail as clearly as if it had happened yesterday. Weird scarecrows don't just pop up in fields. They also appear on the open road. On the afternoon of February 27th, 1998, a truck driver who went by the CB handle Gunslinger was driving his rig down Interstate 255 in Illinois. It was a normal day for him, nothing strange at all. But as he approached the junction where I-255 meets I-270, there was something strange on the side of the road that made him slow down. There was a figure, and it was just still, not moving. Initially, he assumed it was a statue or something that somebody had put up, but as his truck got closer, it suddenly turned its head and looked right at him, and that's when he got a really good look at it, and it was strange. It was huge, standing well over 6 feet, maybe even 7 feet tall, long matted hair covering its face and arms. But you want to know what really stood out to him? This thing had what looked like a peg leg just below its right knee. Not only that, but it had on these clothes that were really odd too, all torn up and looking very old-fashioned, like a scarecrow. So for a second, he wondered if what he was seeing wasn't some kind of a joke or prank, but when it moved, turning its head to look at him, he knew that what he was seeing wasn't fake. Whatever it was real, but it wasn't normal. The encounter freaked him out so much that when he stopped for his break, the first thing he did was to record it in his logbook. In the margin, he simply wrote, "Strange, wild-looking man seen." And on the back, he added, "This thing was big, hairy, and almost looked fake until it moved." He was very sure this was, in his words, no ordinary hitchhiking man. Now, for almost 2 years, he just told his story to other truckers on the CB radio or over some coffee at the truck stop. But on March 15th, 2000, another truck driver had a similar experience. A man by the name of Brad Royalty was driving on Interstate 44 near Big Cabin, Oklahoma, which is hundreds of miles away from where the other man had his encounter. And as Brad was driving, he too spotted what he first thought was just a homeless person standing by the road. And when he got closer, he realized this wasn't a regular person. The figure that Brad saw was very tall and hairy, and it too had a wooden leg. Additionally, it didn't act like a normal person. It didn't wave or try to get anyone's attention. It just stood there and stared at him as he drove past. Unlike the other guy, Brad gave this thing a name, and when he told other people about it, he later called it the peg-legged road troll. And as funny as all this might sound, this wasn't the only sighting of this thing, because months later, in the middle of the summer of 2000, a husband and wife trucking team had their own run-in with what seemed to be the same thing. They were driving on Interstate 70 near Boonville, Missouri, which means that whatever this thing is had been spotted in at least 3 different states. Another trucker named Doug later said that what was so weird was that the figure wasn't doing anything that made sense. It wasn't trying to hitchhike, there weren't any broken down vehicles nearby, it was just standing there watching traffic go by. Doug described it as looking like a huge scarecrow. But he seems to have seen exactly what Gunslinger and Bradley saw, because just like the other sightings, it had an artificial leg and was covered in lots of hair. But the really telling thing was how Doug's wife reacted. I mean, she was terrified and refused to talk about it much. Even years later, all she would say about it was, "It scared me to death." And to this day, she refuses to even drive through Boonville, Missouri. And she says that she'd rather add 2 hours to any trip than take that stretch of Interstate 70 again. Well, folks, later that year, a paranormal researcher named Jerry Coleman heard about these weird highway sightings, and of course, he decided to look into it, figuring there had to have been something to it. So he tracked down the man who called himself Gunslinger and interviewed him about what he had seen back in '98, and this witness still had his logbook from that day with the notes that he'd written about this strange experience. Now, by this point, Coleman knew about the other similar sightings across 3 different states. But what made it so strange was how similar they all were. Even though they happened to different people in different places, over about 2.5 years, truck drivers in Illinois, Oklahoma, and Missouri all reported seeing basically the same thing. A really tall figure, covered in hair, wearing weird tattered clothing, and having a wooden leg. Whether it was a troll or a scarecrow entity, like the beings seen in Thailand or England, is really anyone's guess. Now, it's hard to ignore how similar these stories are. Still silent figures with creepy, unnatural features showing up in fields or by the side of the road and then just vanishing. And they're always witnessed by ordinary people in quiet, mundane moments. So are these just tricks of the light, hallucinations, or carefully crafted hoaxes? Or do they hint at something far more mysterious? If these are scarecrows, then what are they guarding? And because you guys made it this far into the episode, I want you to all comment below peg leg, so that way I know who made it to the end and who didn't. And if you guys enjoy this kind of content where we deep dive into strange cases of the mysterious and supernatural, what are you waiting for? Smack that like and subscribe button right now for more content just like this. Never forget, I love you all, keep an open mind, and I'll see you all in the very next episode.